Welcome back to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and I want to address the subject of anxiety today. But before I begin, if the podcast has been helpful to you, please consider supporting it financially. The way you can do that is to go to my website, get the Place We Find Ourselves app, and sign up for $30 per year or $3 per month. New episodes of the podcast released to the app 4 weeks before they are available on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. Thank you for considering it. Okay, anxiety. Let's begin with what is it? Anxiety is different than fear. Hilary Jacobs Hendel is a therapist who draws a very helpful distinction between fear and anxiety. She says fear is an emotional reaction to the presence of genuine or perceived danger in the environment. So, you see a fire in your kitchen, you feel fear. You don't feel anxiety. Anxiety, on the other hand, is what you feel when you are avoiding important emotions. Anxiety is what you feel when you push down core emotions like sadness, grief, anger. So here's a good diagnostic test. If you are feeling something that feels like fear, but you are not in any danger in the moment, then you are likely experiencing anxiety. And Hilary Jacobs Hendel goes on to say that our experience of anxiety is often linked to early experiences with emotions. What does that mean? Well, suppose that when you were sad as an 8-year-old girl, suppose that your mother always withdrew from you whenever you were sad, or she got irritated by your sadness. What do you think that 8-year-old is going to do with her sadness? She'll learn to suppress it, to push it down, to avoid it. And as a result, her sadness will not be able to flow through her body. She will not be able to digest and process the sadness of any particular heartache from any particular day as an 8-year-old. In time, this girl will begin to feel anxiety whenever sadness bubbles up. Now, why? Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, her brain has paired sadness with mom withdraws or mom gets upset with me. That's number 1. Number 2, she begins to accumulate a reservoir of unfelt sadness in her body since she was never allowed to feel sadness in her home growing up. And whereas she would have been able to process through any one incident of sadness, she is, as an adult, overwhelmed by the cumulative unfelt sadness that is in her heart, that is in her body. And so now, as a 28-year-old, when she feels sadness, it connects her to all that unfelt sadness inside her heart, and that is overwhelming. Hence, she feels anxious. So, let me say it again. Anxiety is what you feel when you are avoiding important emotions. And please note, in the example I'm giving, the avoidance of her sadness, it's not this girl's fault. She's not making a conscious decision to avoid her sadness. She's not suppressing it as it were consciously. She's an 8-year-old girl with a mom who can't tolerate her sadness. Therefore, avoiding sadness is this girl's only option. But the price that this 8-year-old girl pays for not being allowed to feel her sadness and digest it and let it flow through her body is that lots of unfelt sadness begins to accumulate inside of her. And in time, that leads to anxiety. Now, there are a lot of reasons that children are forced to push down core emotions like sadness, anger, fear. First off, many children are told or shown that they are bad or weak for feeling sad. Many children receive the message that if they feel fear, it means they're weak. Or if they feel anger, it means they are bad. You're not supposed to be angry at your brother or your mother. So just ponder a few questions with me. When you felt fear or sorrow as a kid, were those emotions welcomed by your mother, by your father? And did your parents sit with you in your fear or sorrow and help you process through it? Or did you somehow get the message that your fear or sorrow was bad or weak or simply unwelcome? We can't deal with that in our household right now. And what about anger? When you felt anger as a kid, was that anger welcomed by your mother? When you were angry at your mother, did she make space for that anger? Was it allowed? Did she hear you out and let you express your anger at her? And what about your father? Did your father make room in your home for your anger? Here's another reason we learn to push down our sadness, fear, or anger. It's because feeling these things, feeling sadness, fear, or anger, conflicts with other beliefs or values that are important to us. Now, let me flesh this out because this is a big one, especially for Christians. Let me take a minute to talk about the relationship that many Christians have to their emotions. As a Christian, what should be your response when you feel fear or sorrow or anger? For many Christians, feeling sadness conflicts with their beliefs about what they should be feeling. They should be rejoicing in the Lord always, not sad. Similarly, take fear. For many Christians, feeling fear conflicts with their beliefs about what they should be feeling. They should be strong and courageous, not afraid, trusting in God, not fearful. And anger, for many Christians, goodness gracious, feeling anger conflicts with their beliefs about what they should be feeling. They shouldn't let the sun go down on their anger. They should be forgiving, not angry. And as a result, when these emotions of sadness, fear, or anger bubble up inside of you, you shove them into the basement of your heart because you feel like it's ungodly, that it's wrong to feel sadness, fear, or anger. Okay? That shoving of those emotions deep down inside leads to anxiety. Why? Because anxiety is often caused by avoiding feelings that your body is trying to experience and that your body needs to express because they're real, because they're there. If you are angry, for example, because you feel wronged by someone, and you shove that anger down because you feel like the good Christian thing to do is not to get angry, then you are going to experience anxiety. Because anger doesn't just go away. Sadness doesn't just go away. Your emotions don't go away simply because you ignore them. Now, notice what happens when you start to feel anxiety. How do you tend to respond when you're anxious? How do you tend to respond? Very often, we respond to our anxiety the same way we responded to our sadness, fear, and anger. We feel guilty about feeling the anxiety. I can't tell you how many times my body has been filled with anxiety, and I have responded by saying to myself, Adam, the Bible says don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. That's Philippians 4:6. You may be familiar with it. Do not be anxious about anything, is what Paul says. And so I would say to myself, stop feeling anxious. Just trust God with whatever it is that's making you anxious. Here's the problem with that. you are attempting to do the very thing that is making you anxious in the first place. You are attempting to push your real feelings down, to push your anxiety down. But remember, that's what causes anxiety in the first place. Anxiety is often caused by pushing down unfelt feelings that are coming up, that are rising up inside. The Bible is far more complex than we want to acknowledge. It is irreducibly diverse, which means it can't be reduced to a single sentence. Here's what that means. Here's what this means with regard to anxiety. Yes, Paul writes, don't be anxious about anything. Philippians 4. But do you know that just 2 chapters earlier in this letter, Paul talks about his own anxiety? Yes, Paul is talking about sending his friend Epaphroditus back to the church in Philippi, and Paul says this, I'm quoting, I am eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. That's in Philippians 2. So look, Paul had anxiety. Paul felt fear. In 2 Corinthians 7, Paul says, when we came into Macedonia, this body of ours had no rest, but we were harassed at every turn, conflicts on the outside, fears within. Fears within. He was afraid. 2 Corinthians 7. And then later in 2 Corinthians, Paul again talks about the anxiety he has because he's worried about all the churches that he has planted. For many Christians, anxiety is caused by the refusal to own and express the anger that is actually inside of you. As a Christian, you believe that you're not supposed to be angry, at least not that angry. And if you are a Christian woman, God have mercy. Christian men are allowed to have a little anger, but Christian women are absolutely demonized for it. If a Christian woman turned over tables like Jesus did, she would be looked down upon and people would wonder if she was mentally unstable. This, oh my gosh, this is diabolical, truly. Your anger is there for a reason. And there is always some element of your anger that needs to be blessed. I'm not saying always all of it, but there is always some element of it that needs to be blessed and named good. Okay, I want to shift for a minute to talking about how anxiety is almost always linked to your story, to your autobiographical narrative, to your past. Yes, the past is present. When you feel anxious today, there is a reason for that. And that reason will be found in your story. Some of you are anxious about finances. Some of you are anxious about your 7th grader being picked on at school or excluded from friend groups. Some of you are anxious about, your relationship with your parents because it's not what you hoped it would be. Now consider this. Why do we become anxious about different things? Why are some of you anxious about money and others are not? It's not as simple as, well, some people have more money. Studies show that wealthy people are just as anxious about finances as other people. Why are some of you anxious about your 7th grader and others are not? There is a reason that you are anxious about the things you are anxious about, and that reason is rooted in your story. In other words, anxiety needs to become a prompt for you to be curious about your story, especially your story from 0 to 18 in your family of origin. Your anxiety in the present is almost always connecting you to unfelt emotions from your past, especially unfelt emotions that you experienced in your family of origin, but that you couldn't experience. You couldn't feel them because it wasn't safe enough and there was no space for it. Let me just say it one more time because it's the fundamental thesis today. Your anxiety in the present is almost always connecting you to unfelt emotions and pain from your past. So, summary. And anxiety is a light on the dashboard of your heart that says something is not right with your emotions inside. You have unfelt emotions inside that need tending to. You have unfelt pain inside that needs your attention and is trying to get your attention. All right, let's get real practical for a minute and talk about how to identify anxiety in your body. How do you know if you're feeling anxious? If you experience any of the following during your day, you may be experiencing anxiety. Increased heart rate, shortness of breath, sweating, dizziness, chest pain, muscle pain and tension, tightness, especially like in the head, the neck, the jaw, the face. These bodily sensations often produce a felt sense of nervousness or restlessness somewhere in your torso, or a sense of doom in your throat or your chest. And we call that constellation of symptoms anxiety. Now look, there are other things, lots of other things besides anxiety that cause all those bodily sensations I just named. But if you are experiencing one or multiple of these symptoms, it might be your body's way of saying you're anxious. It's important to become familiar with your body, and particularly the sensations in your body. Why? Because emotions are first bodily sensations. This is important. All an emotion is a particular combination of bodily sensations. If you are not connected to your body, if you're not aware of the sensations in your gut, throat, chest, back, stomach, then you can't name what you are feeling and you can't engage it well. So at this point, I need to talk about affect and affect regulation, because when most people say, I'm feeling anxious, what they are confessing is that their body is in a state of dysregulation. Dysregulation. So what do we mean by that? What is affect? What is affect regulation? Affect is the felt sense of what is happening inside your body. It refers to your inner emotional and bodily experience. It's your moment-to-moment experience of your internal bodily sensations, and affect exists on a spectrum. Think of affect on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 represents completely numb and shut down, and 10 represents panic or rage. On this scale, 5 to 6 represents a slight feeling of relaxed excitement. You're alert, you're present, you're attentive. Hopefully you're in the 5 to 6 range right now as you're listening. When you are in the 5 to 6 range, you are regulated. It's the zone of optimal arousal. When you're in the 5 to 6 place, you are not dysregulated. Now, in the 1 to 3 range, your body is in a state of hypoarousal. Hypo just means low. Your arousal is very low. Hypoarousal, 1 to 3, is marked by bodily sensations such as a sense of numbness or being shut down, shallow breathing, difficulty concentrating. You just feel checked out. And this range also correlates with emotions like shame, hopelessness, and or despair. When you're in the 1 to 3 range, when you feel yourself numbing out or shutting down, you will often be experiencing some measure of shame, hopelessness, or despair. Now, conversely, in the 8 to 10 range, that's when your body is in a state of hyperarousal. Hyper means high. In hyperarousal, you will experience bodily sensations like a racing heart, faster breathing, a tightening in your chest or stomach. It's a sense of jitteriness in your body. It's this feeling of being amped up inside. And you will also feel emotions like panic, terror, and or rage. So 5 to 6 is optimal arousal. You're present, you're alert, slight feeling of excitement. Whenever you are out of the 4 to 7 range, your body is in a state of dysregulation. The 8 to 10 panic zone is dysregulation, and the 1 to 3 shutdown zone is dysregulation. And incidentally, people that are hypoaroused, 1 to 3, they may not appear to be dysregulated. They often look calm, and sometimes they might even look present, but they are just as dysregulated as someone in a panicked state of hyperarousal. It just looks different on the outside. So, summary, affect exists on a continuum. It ranges from numb and shut down, 1 to 3, through relaxed attentiveness, 5 to 6, on to panicked and frenzied, 8 to 10. Most of the time, when people say, I feel anxious, what they mean is that their body is dysregulated. They are not in the sweet spot of 5 to 6, where they feel relaxed and calm and present and grounded. Usually, when someone says, I feel anxious, they mean that they are hyper-aroused, 8 or higher. Anxiety is a hyper-aroused, dysregulated bodily state. Now, everyone gets dysregulated. Everyone. However, some people get dysregulated more frequently than others. It happens more times in a given day. And some people get dysregulated by more subtle stimuli. So, for example, if you're at a restaurant and a man walks in with a semi-automatic weapon demanding everyone's wallet, you and everyone else in that place are going to get dysregulated. But some people will also get dysregulated by something much more subtle, such as a difficult interaction or a conflictual interaction with someone important to you. Just as some people get dysregulated more often than others, it is also true that some people have a much harder time getting regulated again. This is the double whammy of trauma. If you have a history of trauma, you will get dysregulated more often than other people. You will. And as if that's not hard enough, if you have a history of trauma, you will also have a much harder time getting regulated again. Do you see the double whammy? Not everyone's brain has the same ability to self-regulate. So, what do we do? Look, what are we to do about all of this? What can you do when you feel anxious? What can you do when you are dysregulated? The two most important words for you to begin carrying around with you as you are engaging your anxiety are these two words: curiosity and kindness. Curiosity and kindness. When you become aware that you're anxious, the two questions that need to come to mind are, will I be curious about what this anxiety might be telling me? And number two, what would it look like to be kind to my body right now? Two questions. Will I be curious about what the anxiety in my body is trying to say? That's question one. And question two, what would it look like to be kind to my body right now? Here's the crux of the issue. What does God want for you, his son or daughter, when you are feeling anxious? Another way of saying that is, what do you think God wants for your body when your body is suffering cortisol? When you are anxious, it means that there are elevated levels of cortisol in your body. And sustained elevated levels of cortisol are not good for the body or the brain. In other words, when you are feeling anxious, you are suffering. You're suffering. What does God want for you when your body is in a state of suffering? I think two things. God wants you to experience the comfort that kindness brings, and in time, God wants you to take your body seriously, which means to be curious about what your body's anxiety is trying to tell you about your life and about your story. So, next time you are feeling anxious, here's a 3-step approach to responding to that anxiety with kindness and curiosity. First, notice the anxiety. The first step is always awareness. Awareness of what you are experiencing in your body. Notice where in your body you're feeling the anxiety? Is it in your head, your throat, your chest, your gut? Where is it? And then just tune into it. Just notice it. Second, once you notice the anxiety, ask yourself, what would kindness to my body look like right now? Part of kindness is doing some things that begin to bring regulation back to your body, that begin to soothe your body. So, for example, pressing your feet into the ground and mindfully taking several deep breaths, this will begin to soothe your dysregulated body. There are two ways to respond to anxiety. There are what's called top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches. Now, here's what I mean. I'll explain. The brain has three main parts. You've got the cortex on the top, the limbic system in the middle, and the brainstem on the bottom. Anxiety is a limbic system experience, the part that's in the middle. All right, a top-down response to your anxiety is attempting to use your cortex, the part on top, that is your thinking brain, to calm your limbic brain, to calm your anxiety. This means self-talk, saying things to yourself to try and calm your anxiety. And if you've tried this, you know it often doesn't work very well. And this is because top-down approaches to regulating your anxiety don't work nearly as well as bottom-up approaches. What's a bottom-up approach? It's using your brainstem, the part on the bottom, to calm your limbic system. How do you do that? Breathing. Focusing on your breathing, slowing your breathing, will immediately begin to calm your anxious limbic brain. And then, after you have breathed a little, ask yourself, what else would bring my body a deeper sense of calm? Answers might include certain pieces of music. That's it for me. Certain pieces of music, or a hot bath, or looking at particular photos of people that you feel safe with, or smelling an essential oil that you really like. Look, you have to find out what are those things that soothe your body. Now, third thing you can do, gently ask yourself, what emotions might I be pushing down and suppressing? Or to say it differently, if you don't like the way that's worded, what might my anxiety be trying to tell me? Be curious about what your anxiety might be protecting you from feeling. Are you sad about something? Are you feeling grief? Are you angry about something? The goal is to let your emotions flow. The goal is to experience and express the emotions that are underneath the anxiety. The unfelt and avoided emotions, especially sadness, grief, fear, anger, that are causing the anxiety in the first place. So think of your emotional life as a river. You want the river to flow freely. So whatever emotion you're feeling, you want it to be able to flow down the river. In other words, you want to be able to experience it fully and express it fully. That's what it means to flow down the river. When rivers can't flow freely, bad things happen, like floods. Similarly, you can become flooded with anxiety when the river of your emotions is not free to flow. You want to ride the flow of your emotions down the river they take you on. So, if you're sad about something in the present, today, you need to let your body feel that sadness and express that sadness because it matters. And if you have unfelt sadness from your past, and who doesn't, you need to let your body feel that sadness and express that sadness. The task, in many ways, the invitation, in so many ways, is simply to bear witness to the suffering you endured as a boy or girl. Very often when we feel anxiety, it's because there is a part of us that wants us to pay attention to it and to take it seriously. There might be a very angry part of you from middle school that needs you to bear witness to why it is you're so angry, and to take that anger seriously, to let it have some space. And it will be particularly helpful if you can do this with one or two other people. We are designed to discharge emotion, that is to experience emotion, to let emotion flow in community with others. Many cultures have communal rituals, 1, 2, 3, 10 other people, for the expression of and the release of emotions like sorrow and rage. And it can be oh so very helpful to have another person, even just one, bear witness to your experience of sorrow and to feel it with you. This, of course, is what the Spirit of God does. This is what it means when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." The comfort of God is what happens when you risk allowing yourself to feel your sadness or your grief or your anger in God's presence, and you experience God bearing witness to your story and your suffering. Let me close with a personal example. When one of my children is off, out of my sight, doing something, at a friend's house, riding their bike, whatever, I often get hit with a jolt of anxiety that something bad is going to happen to them. What if my son Eli falls off his bike because he's at a friend's house riding his bike, or he's riding home and he falls off and he's all alone and I'm not there to help him? One way to respond to this anxiety is to be curious. Say, why am I anxious about Eli falling off his bike and being all alone with no one there with him, no one to help him, no one to care for him? What I'm really anxious about is that Eli would feel immense helplessness and or aloneness and terror. And if I let myself feel those feelings of helplessness and being utterly alone when I'm in need and the terror that results, I will soon realize that I felt these feelings as a boy all the time. And I haven't yet processed through those unfelt feelings. My anxiety about Eli falling off his bike or getting hurt and being all alone, that anxiety is caused by my unfelt feelings from my growing up years. So, summary. More often than not, you are feeling anxiety because your body is holding unfelt feelings like sadness, grief, anger. And your anxiety is saying, it's like knocking on your door. And it's saying, hey, there are some important feelings inside that you're not paying sufficient attention to. And I need you to pay attention to me. And I need you to experience this feeling and express it so that it can flow through you. Thank you so much for listening to the episode today. Remember that if you want to support the podcast financially, if it's been helpful to you, you can go to my website, get the Place We Find Ourselves app, and sign up for $30 per year. I will be back in a couple weeks with another episode.